Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And we are continuing our indie comic book deep dive into Dive by Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans. And this book continues to surprise me. In a lot of ways, because now, for the record, if you happen to just stumble across our podcast, and this is the first one you're listening to, I don't know how you make decisions, but this is volume 3 of a 4-volume series, and we do spoil the one that we are on and go no further. And I say that to say this, another series that we've covered is Paper Girls. And I was getting Unwritten vibes, which was another series that we've covered before, and now, we meet H.G. Wells and a couple other characters, but now that I understand kind of the machinations of the world and how these kids got sucked down there as teenagers and how they are going to be like reinserted in the timeline, unless something changes, I'm like, holy smokes, this is now Paper Girl vibes in a strong, and like only in a positive way. It's not like, oh, he's clearly stealing from Paper Girls. He may have never read Paper Girls, but
I know what you're saying. The idea that, this is
circular cause of events.
Yeah, I was going to say the idea that there's this idea of some level of, I was going to say time travel, but that's not really it. This idea of like time manipulation, that time is malleable, and the order of events in terms of our characters is not always linear, right? So the idea that things are happening outside of time, and that's what the fair are, when they go, when the group goes and talks to them and they get those answers there, the idea that things are happening outside of time, and they're not happening linearly, and that things from their perspective that happened after other events can still all be linked. So yeah, no, that it's we talked last week about how volume 2 was about building the world out. It was laying the world. It was a lot of character work in terms of, we talked about rules, right? What are the rules of the characters? What can they do? How do they function in the game, in the world of Die? And there was always this little background noise of like, what is Die? Because every so often someone had a question of like, well, who are the Fallen? Like, how can these people be here? What's going on? And
there was like, it seemed early on like Soul created it. And there's all this evidence to the contrary that it predates. I'm sorry, 100%. How did Soul bring in Tolkien?
Exactly.
And how did he bring in the Brontes?
Exactly. And that's the underlying current, because their understanding when they first got there, that Soul created this, because he said he created it. And in a lot of ways, he did create it from his teenage perspective, in terms of that feedback loop.
Right.
He created the game simply as a portal to get down to an existing world. He didn't know that at the time. But for our group of characters, in their mind, the understanding is that Soul created all of this. But now they're realizing that we know Soul is not the game maker. He's not the game master. Like, he's a player in the game, and that was a realization for Soul as well, thinking this whole time that he was the guy in charge, and having this realization now that he's just a player like everybody else. Which, if you go all the way back to the beginning, you go back to the beginning of the book in issue 1, Soul talks about that when they're making their characters, and he assigns everybody their specific die. He even says like, no, I'm not. He makes a mention of, no, I'm playing the game too. I get the D20, but I'm a player as well. Not really understanding what that meant.
Or all that it could mean. Yeah,
exactly. Thinking it from the perspective of, I'm the dungeon master, I'm the game master here, and I'm part of the party, but I'm also the one pulling the strings because I wrote the story. No. He is actually a player now, and that's a realization that he gets. And so, yeah, there's this feedback loop of, and like I said, these were underlying currents, because every so often someone on the party would make some mention of like, yeah, isn't it weird that this thing is here? Like, what's going on here? Well, did Soul do that? Like, how can he have done that? And all this kind of stuff was building. Yeah. And then we get to, what I mentioned last week, that each of these arcs have like a quote unquote big issue, You know, you got a lot of action, a lot of story and whatnot. And then there's like one issue that like, here is the issue of the arc. And
this one, it came where I would expect it this time in a 5-issue. I was expected to be the third one.
Yeah,
Last time it was like, I got through the third one and I was like, I kind of thought the meat would be at the midway point.
It came in issue 9 last arc. Here it comes right in the middle, issue 13, when they meet H.G. Wells. That's the big download. And that's where you find out kind of the what and the how. And you get this feedback loop and you start understanding of, okay, so whatever's going on here is way bigger than anybody had any clue of, including like Tolkien or that version of Tolkien, the version of the Brontes, you know, all this stuff here. And even H.G. the quote unquote H.G. Wells we meet here, you know, right. He's under this delusion of guess that like his book, Little Wars, like this, I wrote this thing and it was a satire and it stopped and there was no great war. And Ash is like, no, dude, you failed. Still happened. In fact, happened twice, you know? But so, yeah, it's this realization, kind of this, we've set everything up. And when you kind of pull the curtain back, here's what's going on. It is start kind of things start tumbling into place, or they're kind of falling apart and into place at the same time there, because everyone is realizing that they're just pieces in this game, that they seemingly have no control over anything. You know, that all these things happen in a loop because that's how they got here.
Yeah. And as a reader, I feel like what was pulled back was, in a metafiction sense, it pulled back the genre, because I would have called this fantasy because, you know, even though there are like, you know, mech dragons and things like that, it's still very much a fantasy, a quest type thing. They're all pseudo medieval vibe and, you know, traveling around and doing these things. Yeah. But this premise, the mechanisms of die, is a pure sci-fi play.
It is. It brings in. Yeah, I agree. It brings in.
Now you're telling
it blends in something different. Yep.
Right. You're telling a fantasy story in a sci-fi setting, and that
or it's a sci-fi story in a fantasy setting, because die is a fantasy.
Yeah, in the other way. That's right.
Yeah.
It's one or the other. Yeah, but it's
or both.
It's clearly
thing,
neither.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm not a fantasy reader. As I think, like, generally speaking, I don't like fantasy, and I don't like anything that's ever like pseudo medieval. Like, I find, you know, Game of Thrones like intrinsically boring, because I'm like, kings and castles and princes and knights and princesses. Like, I'm so tired of that stuff.
The swords and sandals kind of fantasy, right? The high fantasy stuff, right?
Right. Especially when it's a lot of world building just for the sake of world building.
Sure.
And for that reason, I wasn't crazy about volume 1 of this book. I mean, I liked it. I would read all of this for Stephanie Hans. As I was reading this volume, I was like, you know, I would watch her illustrate anything. Yeah. You know, she could illustrate the encyclopedia, and I would. She has some
great moments. She has some great moments in this arc, definitely.
So many great moments, and I was like, this isn't really my type of story as I was going through volume 1, but I was like, objectively, this is great storytelling and it's really good dialogue. So I'm like, so it's great writing. I'm like, I like all of the ingredients. Why aren't I connecting with this? And then you give me like a sci-fi time bending plot twist, and it's like, okay, well, now you have me on the story as well. So if you put two talented people together, eventually you'll hook me, which is a great argument for, you are not frequently an abandoner of books, right?
No,
like you kind of have a completionist gene.
100%.
There are a few exceptions that I've heard over the years, but by and large, when you start something, you finish it. Whereas I have a lot of trade volume 1s on my shelf where I'm like, I checked it out, you know, then didn't get
so for me, it's really, if I get past trade 1, I'm going to finish it. If I get past the opening, for me, I will try plenty of stuff out. But yeah, if I can't get past trade 1, all right, you know what? Probably not for me. I feel like it's not gonna waste my time. If I'm hooked enough to go past that, even if it's like a 3-volume thing, especially that, if I get to volume 2, then what the hell? I'm not gonna finish it off.
Right. You know? Well, but like a one with like a challenging twist, and not to do another call back to ourselves, but I can't help it. At Grass Kings, I think Volume 1, I knew a lot of people that were hooked. Grass Kings Volume 2, no pun intended, kind of got in the weeds.
Yeah.
And was long and tangential and backstories. And
okay. I see what you're saying.
Know.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people I know trailed off by the time the third volume was being written.
Okay. So in that scenario, then no, I hardly ever abandon a book. If I am hooked on something and then something decreases in quality in my mind, I will stick it out at that point. Like it has to get like really bad for me to.
Right. It would have to be like offensive
out.
Bad.
Yeah.
But like
but if something, exactly. Yeah. If I think it's bland or if I think the story's taking a direction that I don't like, I'll still probably read it. Yeah, it has to be like offensively bad for me to stop. But if there's something that hooked me initially, they got me to keep going. Yeah, I will absolutely barrel through. Yeah, there is. You said that completionist gene. That's to my detriment at some point. Because there's a part of me that goes along with this completionist gene is that like if I'm gonna tell you why I don't like something, like I feel like I have to know why. So the only way to do that is to have experienced it, so I can tell you exactly why I didn't like it. So that means finishing bad movies or bad TV series. If you tap out something halfway through and you say you didn't like it, okay, that's fine. But hey, I watched that junk all the way in, and I can tell you exactly why it's bad. It's that sort of thing.
You don't even know what bad is.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's the same with the comic. If something goes downhill, if I abandon it right then for me it's like, well, I stopped reading because I didn't like where it was going, or I thought it was going, or where it sensed it was going. But that doesn't mean it can't change course and do something better or do something even worse. So for me, it's that unknown of like, well, if I'm going to tell people I don't like this thing, someone asks me about it. So, and a great example is Wicked and Divine. Again, I know a lot of people that like it. I have no opinion on it because I didn't finish it. I didn't get past that first arc. So I don't know. All I know is it didn't grab me, not because I didn't think it was good. It didn't hook me as a reader. So I have no opinion on it of what is good, what people like about it, what they don't. I mean, that fan base is rabid for Wicked and Divine. And it's just, I can't participate in that conversation because I don't have the knowledge for it, intentionally so, because I stopped reading it. But if we're talking about something like, not to like say Beetlejuice is named 3 times, but if we're talking about something like the Snyder Cut, like I watched all of that crap and I can tell you exactly what's wrong with it, versus a movie like, I don't know, like I didn't see Shazam 2.
Yeah, so, me either.
Like I don't know.
Reasons. But
yeah.
I was going to say,
I can't tell you why that's any good, but I have seen Black Adam. I can tell you why that one's bad. So it's that sort of thing. That. Like if I'm going to have an opinion on something, positive or negative, I feel like I have to have all the information. So what
you're saying is the internet was not built for you.
Oh no.
Most people do not bother to. I mean, years ago, I won't out anyone by name, but I was on a comic book podcast, two comic book podcasts ago, and it was the week that Age of Ultron came out. And me and another host were talking about, all the things we liked about it. We were excited about it. And one guy was just determined to be the naysayer. And he was saying, I think Marvel's lost it. They don't really have it anymore, which is like 2014. People are still saying that. I'm like, man, you guys are like the guys still keeping track of your ex, because like if I lost interest in something 10 years ago, I'm not still commenting on the internet every day about it in 2024. Yeah. But anyway, we got to our commercial break and we're like, oh, hey man, like, when did you see it? I thought you told us you weren't going to have time to see it and you were debating not being on. He was like, well, I watched like a pirated version online and I dropped out after like 15 minutes. And I was like, so you don't even know the plot of the movie. And it's that easy to be a contrarian. And I was just so filled with rage and totally lost respect for
because it is
anything he said about anything.
Exactly. Because it is be contrarian. So yeah, I understand if someone would tap out of like, that's fine. Just be honest about it. Just be like, I read this comic to issue here, and this is what I didn't like about it. Okay, that's fine. You can only judge what you've read, but like, you can't have an opinion on anything else, And if, again, I would just like it to be honest about what you've seen, what you've experienced. If you haven't seen the movie, or if you haven't read the book or whatever it is that you're talking about, tell me so I know I can ignore you.
And every once in a while, I mean, I won't say more often than that, but every once in a while, you are really rewarded for that, because like most comic fans was watching like the Arrowverse shows, and like Arrow season 1, loved it. Season 2, I was like, okay, I like it. Season 3 was like, okay, same old, same old. Season 4 was atrocious. It was so bad, but I secretly kept watching it. And season 5 was probably my second favorite season of the show. They talked about it in the off season. They were like, we started going in this direction. As it was on screen, we were like, oh, this didn't work, did it? but you're already right. You're shooting so many episodes ahead, and they're like, well, we got to finish out that story arc, but we're renewed for another season, so we'll straighten out the ship and
fix it there, sure,
and delivered some stuff that I really liked after that. I never circled back on the Flash. They did finally shake me off on that one, although I have thought in my head I'll probably go see it.
It's ending like literally now.
I know.
Either it just did, or
the last season I saw was 4 or 5.
Yeah. Well, again, that totally happens. I'll mention Wicked again. Even talking to my brother about that, he had a similar thing. He read the first arc, he liked it, and then he thought it went downhill. And then once it was like announced that this is going to be the end here, whatever what that was, and so it kind of knew it had an ending point. Like you said, it got way better at the end, and it finished really strong. So you can have those kind of dips and arcs, and especially obviously if you're talking about like a really long run, not everything is going to be like, it's really hard to have them all be winners. I mean, like that's like really, really hard. That's an incredibly small fraternity of books that can have long runs. But I mean, here, we're only talking about 20 issues, so I think one really good thing about Die is that there really is no filler. And I don't think, if one issue maybe doesn't hit you because, I don't know, you didn't like the setting they were in, or you didn't like how the characters were acting in a certain way, it's going to move pretty quickly. You're going to move. The story's going to have some pace to it. So it's
and even when
things going to evolve and change.
And I think like the second issue in this arc, for instance, not that much happened. It was a necessary issue.
Yes.
But if I was pulling this monthly and I bought that, I still enjoyed the reading experience, because it's more than just about like a plot delivery device. It's an immersive experience of art and storytelling and dialogue and character building. And it's like, okay, well, the story was kind of treading water for an issue.
Well, yeah,
but the characters were advancing, and I still bought 30-ish pages of stunning artwork, which I saw. This was hilarious. There's on Twitter this week, as I'm recording, the Vidaha, who we covered on the Seeds, he retweeted, somebody made a limited run print of like 500 posters for a Hawkeye poster that he made. And by the time I saw it, it was already sold out. And so he had done like a reply tweet to the thing. And he said, here you can buy 128 pages of my printed art for only $19.99. And it was a link to the Seeds trade paperback. And I was like, but that's 100% correct.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you more so than I, but I have reread it since then to pour over those pages and some of the choices that he makes with paneling and things like that.
Oh yeah.
Like absolutely. You could rip it out of the book and stick it on the wall.
Oh
and
yeah,
it's
no,
great.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
And I feel the same way about Stephanie Hans. Every artist that we've covered. We have not covered a bad artist yet. Yeah. And it will be interesting. I think eventually we will cover an artist that I feel like only okay about, where it's like, yeah, I mean, they were a sufficient artist.
I mean, you can find plenty of people who would look at Jeff Lemire stuff and be like, "Are we sure this is good?"
Oh yeah, well yeah, no, but but they're not the people who are going to be reading it.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
I think those people are coming to comics for something totally different, which is fine. Yeah, it's a medium.
Yeah.
There's
but no, I think someone like, again, the strength of what Hans does is, again, the word I keep using is that it's so evocative, and that you can see the panel or a page, and through the color choices and the way I think the way she does character and kind of frames character, I think you really feel on the page, you kind of feel the emotion, you understand the situation even without having to read the words. Like, is it a tense situation? Is it a sad? Is it moving? Is there anger or rage? Like you get that to it. And I think a lot of that obviously is the color that they use, the color choices that she's going with. And yeah, it's all there on the page. And then you get to read the script, on top of
yes. Well, I mean, and a great illustration. This is from later, but I did screenshot this one for myself.
Where are you at?
You'll know when he says, you go for a one-liner and people still effing die. Don't be any responsible. And he says, hey, that's not anger, or hey, that's anger, not sadness.
Yeah.
You are all kinds of chipper, Grief Knight. We need you to be sad or you're useless. Now, when you have the panel that says, hey, that's anger, not sadness, that there's no narration box. That's just dialogue, meaning it is on Stephanie Hans in the previous panel to have demonstrated anger, not sadness. Because there is a way that his line there could be delivered by just a sad, mopey, depressed person, but it isn't. And so we know that it's anger before we see Chuck whip back at him. So it's just little things like that where it's like, yeah, there's storytelling happening apart from the words.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and in fact, what I've taken to doing now is I will read to prepare for the podcast. I will read the book once through. If I need like a recovery of the synopsis because it covers so much ground.
Yeah.
This one has a great Wikipedia page.
Oh yeah, we mentioned that last week. Yeah.
So I'll go read that.
Very
and
detailed.
Then I go through the entire book again without reading. Just make sure like there's no, major panels, beats, or anything like that I'm missing. And the other thing that I'll say, and I think I've mentioned this before too, is that I'm not usually a reader of ensemble comics. Like I like having a character, maybe two characters that I follow.
So like team books you're talking about, right?
Having a cast of 5 or 6 characters, I feel like there's always a couple that kind of get shoved to the side and they're one-dimensional. And this definitely has like lead characters and tertiary characters, even within the Paragon.
Well, yeah.
But I think in this one, they started passing the ball around a little bit more.
They do.
Everybody's getting in it. But like volume 2, I felt like, okay, so it's basically about like,
for even in this arc too, and I would agree, they are all effectively equal, but Ash is she's just a little bit higher, and
a little more equal. Yeah,
and that should be obvious because
the narration
is Dominic, and when they get down there, it's mostly Ash. Now, obviously, when the characters are split, you get a different story there. But so yeah, I don't think that's you're not denigrating the other characters to be like, well, listen, there's one lead, but yeah, she is the lead, and then like everyone's tied for second. Really, I think the other 4 and really 5, if you include Soul, who really I guess would be kind of just below them. Because obviously he's dead at this point. He's a fallen at this point. And they kind of only go to him when they need him, So really, if you could rank them, it's Ash number 1, and then you have Izzy, Chuck, Matt, and Angela. They're all on a level just below, and then you have Soul, and then you have everyone else who are all the non-player characters, the NPCs.
Right?
All the people they interact with and meet and die. So yeah, but I think they juggle these characters exceptionally well. They think they kind of know when to shift focus, how to move from character to character. So everyone gets some shine, everyone gets growth or an opportunity for growth. You still have Chuck who's not growing, but
they each have a story arc.
Yeah, they're presented with something they have to account. Yeah, they're presented with an obstacle or a quest or something they have to encounter and deal with in their own way. But they're not just part of the party. being there affects them, and they're all giving something very specific they have to deal with. And I said, it's about, it can't be easy giving equal time to everybody, but I think they accomplish it well.
Well, I mean, that's my thing is like every time I'm in this situation and I'm like, hey, I haven't really heard much about this character, that character, and I was pretty interested in them in the first issue. I'm like, why did you include them? Like, if you can't pass the ball around enough, why do you include them? Which is why, I typically don't read like big team up books, because inevitably somebody is just not getting the ball, which, in a long ongoing series, I tend to think of it like, yeah, they put those pieces on the board in case they want to use them later.
Well,
like, if they need to pivot to it, but in a limited 20-issue series,
you're talking about like a Justice League or an Avengers kind of thing.
Sure, right? Yeah, you'll introduce a character and you'll say, if the direction that we want to go with this, fans really aren't buying it or they're not interested in it,
we just pivot.
We'll have left this one. Yeah. Yep, we'll pivot.
Yeah. I mean, so
I start doing backstories.
Of course,
with that character, and then they slide to the spotlight.
Yeah, you make up your team to give yourself the most options, because you probably have like 2 or 3 story arcs. You have a general idea where you want to go, and knowing that, okay, well, we're going to start with this arc that maybe focuses on these few, and then this other person will be elevated for this arc, especially with them, and back and forth. And you can cut something short, you can change the order around. Yeah, it's about giving yourself options for an ongoing. Yeah, if you're talking about a limited series that has a medium to large main cast that you set up as the creators, and then you can't serve that properly, I mean, then that's just on you. That's just
right.
Like the sign of not a very good
I'm
book.
just thinking, compare this tracking. Is it six characters in 20 issues?
It's 6 total if we count Soul.
Right. 6 characters over 20 issues. Yeah. Paper Girls over 30 issues tracks 4 characters, and each one of them has an arc that could have been its own comic book.
Yeah.
And now it's like Paper Girls is comic perfection. This is very good comics.
Yeah.
But if that'd be like if in Paper Girls, like Tish was just kind of like there to help everyone else on their story.
Yeah.
But she wasn't really getting her own, beginning, middle, and end, and her own purpose. So anyway, that's my only nitpick about it so far. But to praise this book, what I will say is, especially in volume 3 here, there's normally this balance between storytelling and exposition. And like good authors do it seamlessly, and bad authors, you feel like, okay, we're pausing the story to go through some exposition.
Yeah.
And Kieran Gillen, he ends up giving me so much more exposition than I realize. Yeah. Only as I like sit down and go through the plot again, do I realize, oh my gosh, yeah, he did unload all of that because it was happening in a story.
When you sit and break it down, you see how it all weaves together, and that you're getting these points of, okay, well, the characters are physically going from point A to point B to point C. They're encountering this to that. They're learning this and that about the story, about what they have to do. And then before you realize it, you, the reader, have been told like effectively what die is. You've learned,
right.
Because I think part of that is,
but you're learning with the characters, and that's the big thing.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Again, we harken back to Paper Girls in terms of how they did that storytelling. When the girls learned about the foldings and the time travel, Aaron was the one asking all the questions that the audience would ask if they were hearing this. So there was an avatar there of someone being like, okay, well, if that's the case, then what about this? Then what about that? Then how did this happen? And it's part of the story, and they're learning it as we're learning it. And Gillen's script does the same thing here by basically just having a one-on-one with Ash and H.G. Wells effectively. And I guess also when was it Matt, Angela, and Chuck when they go and meet the fair. So it's like we're tracking 2 stories there. They're both going on their quest to meet and find answers. And then we, the reader, are able to put all these pieces together and kind of figure out, okay, well, this is what the Kriegspiel was. This is what the wooden soldiers were. That's where the Brontes came from. Okay, well, then here's where the actual, like, the dice came from. Here's what the tabletop games, why that was important. We're finding the characters are being told all these things because we're outside the story. We get them all in there, and I said before we know it, you've learned like all the dots have connected. Now we still don't have the why or how to end it, but you now know the what. You know, like all that's been presented. But by the time you finish this volume, all the questions about who the Fallen are, where do they come from? They came from the future in Earth. You know, why are the Brontes here? Why is there Tolkien, H.G. Wells? Where the dice come from? All this stuff. You understand. You've been given an explanation for it. You don't know what the meaning is really yet, other than trying to, prevent this cataclysm that's supposed to come in 2020, which is something we can talk about in terms of when these issues were published. Right. But there are still questions about, well, what they have to do and what is going on, what's the meaning behind all of this. But they've answered the questions of what die is, where all these pieces, all these seemingly disparate pieces from both history, literature, make-believe, the real world, where does all this stuff come from into die? Well, they basically, so they give you an answer to it. They lay that out for our characters, because this is something that they never learned the first time. They thought they were just in a game the first time,
right. And when you compare this to the ending of the show Lost, where they never explain the mechanics of the world, they never really get into what the thing is, what's actually happening. I mean, it's opaque and you can kind of get there, but we kept waiting for what issue 13 does here in the show of Lost, which was like 7 seasons or something.
Sure.
And it made the finale of that show being like, are you going to explain what I just watched or not? And I'm so glad that I can go into Die Volume 4 understanding the world and the stakes, and it can be about the story rather than the mechanisms. And
sure. Well, but
because he's had a mystery box this whole time, right? I mean, like, what is Die? And like we were saying, it's just as soon as we started, we thought Saul made this. Saul maybe thought Saul made this. He did not.
He did. But that's part of this time loop, is the idea that that he was granted some inspiration to make this game because he had to make this game because he had to lure them into the world. So no, he 100% thought he made it. But then, the longer he's down there, he realizes,
right.
Yeah.
And basically that would have been a great mystery box. And if Kieran Gillen was like J.J. Abrams, he would have resisted opening that box as long as possible, because that's the hook for the story, not the story itself.
Well,
and I don't mean to badmouth JJ.
I know what you're saying there, but like I will defend Lost in the idea a little bit in that it's fine to have the mystery box if the point of the story is the mystery box, not what's inside it, and you never reveal it. I think the point of Lost in the finale was that people were really tied up in the machinations, in the how, of like what's going on and things like that. But that wasn't the story they were telling. And so the finale feels unfulfilled because you didn't get the thing that you thought that what the show was about, when they were saying, no, the show is about something else. I think Die was very specific in the first two, in the first 12 issues, because 13 is where we get the reveal, that there were constant questions about the what. The characters, like if the characters had never questioned, if it never bothered them, I think that would have been them saying like, it doesn't really matter. Even though you, the reader, you could read into me like, well, wait, are they going to explain this? Like, what's going on here? So I think because they had the characters make comment on it, of like, hey, what's going on here? Like, how is this possible? Who are these people here? Because they kept saying it, I think then you have to pay it off. But if that's never a plot point or story point or a character point up until then I don't think you have to, because what you're signaling to the audience is that the how isn't important. All that matters is what we're focusing on here. So I think they had to do it here, is what I'm saying, is they had to have that just
right.
big.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just saying I like a mystery box when it isn't just the mystery box.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I understand what you're saying there. Definitely.
And so I think that's what Die does well, because
Yes.
Die has this mysterious world, and it, which is very similar to Paper Girls again, because the first half of that book is a mystery box. It's like, what is this world they're in? How are they traveling through time? What are they doing? What's the point of any of it? Like, you're just being thrown through the story, and the characters are so compelling that you're hanging with them.
Yeah.
But these questions keep mounting, and they didn't wait until the last page to say, oh, and here's how they kept traveling through time, and here's all this stuff.
Yeah.
They gave it to you because they're like, that's part of the story, but that's not the story itself. And I like that Die is doing something very similar.
That's in my notes here as well. The idea that they gave you the answers of the what here, and you still got the last volume, and so you understand what the quest is now.
Right. It's in no way resolved.
No, exactly.
The stakes are higher than ever because I understand them.
Yes, but now as a reader, when you read on, anything you experience, you're no longer questioning, why is this here? How is this here? What is it for? Now you understand what the mechanics of the world are. So they've taken that part off the board. When we talk about like the 4 different storylines, that kind of meta, like what is Die? They've taken off the constant questioning. You know what the Fallen are.
Right.
You know who these seeming facsimiles of great British authors are. You understand what their presence is there for, and so you're no longer questioning that, and so you can focus on what this final quest is. You can focus on the characters, on what the relationship is together and or apart, like how they're experiencing all of this. And yeah, so this volume ends. It ends with a very definitive quest. We have to go to the heart of Die because we have to stop these dice from being made, because the dice being made that gets sent back to 1981, that starts the whole thing, so now there's a clear, very, very clear and specific quest to go through. And you can focus on just that, focus on just the characters, and worry less about those like lingering questions in the back of your mind about like, what's really going on in Die? They answered that. They cleared that part off the board, said, obviously there's still more to come in terms of talking about the world of Die, but the needling questions of like, why don't things feel right with the Fallen? Why don't they feel right with these authors? Those kind of uneasy things when you think about the world itself, like they resolved those, and now everyone's on the same page, reader and characters. We know what's happening. We understand what the world is made of and how it exists and whatnot. And so you can just move forward on it. I said, they didn't wait to the end. You have that now. And you got that in 13, which meant that you have the last 2 chapters in this arc and all 5 in the next arc, So you've got 7, you basically have a third of the book left where those questions aren't needed anymore. You can focus on what's really important in the story.
Yeah. And we finally get like the backstory on Chuck's sickness, and like, This was the setup book. Like everything hit its like peak of tension, and you now have the right amount of information at the critical moment.
Yep.
And it's a great setup. I cannot yet speak to the finale. There's no reason for me to not believe that they stick.
I could, but obviously I'm not going to. But yes,
right, you could, right?
Yeah.
They've given me every reason to believe these guys really know what they're doing.
Oh yeah. And again, yes, I think if you've read this far, and again, I have to go back and double check when they actually said it was going to be only 20 issues. Because
conceptually, with the cover art being the 20-sided die for every issue, and it does seem like
especially on the back cover. I'm going to show you this, Mike, here on the back cover.
Yeah,
it's a 20-sided die cut out and laid in 2D, and
which is on every cover of the book.
Well, yes, but what I'm saying is
single issue.
Each issue number is highlighted in the proper spot, which is that it's the same cutout you see on the front cover, but on the back, the actual specific number of which face of the die it is laid out, that one's highlighted. So it was very obvious that it was going to be 20. But again, I can't remember if that was said before or if it was like when it was announced sometime in the final arc or before the final arc. I don't really remember. But at this point, knowing that it's completed at 20, I think you can feel very confident that whatever the plan is going towards the end, it is a plan. You know what I'm saying? Like they know what their end point is. They know how they're going to get there. It's not going to be left unresolved. They know what they want to accomplish with the end, you know? And I think you can feel confident that when you get there, there'll be resolution. Again, your mileage can vary on whether that's satisfactory to you or not, but there will be a conclusion. But again, if you've gotten this far and you've seen the work they've put in for the first 15 issues, there is no reason to think that the ending is going to be anything less than that, because I think you're absolutely right. They've taken all the characters. If you look at every single one of them, they're all taken to the brink. You know, they're all at a crescendo right here. I think this includes Saul at this point. You know, because again, he has been kind of the tertiary main character, because again, they only go to him when they need something. But for him at the end, you know, to go a little into the specific plot point there, when Ash feels like she needs to take over the game. You know, like she needs to reach ultimate power. She takes Saul's 20-sided die, you know, because that's going to give her like that's like taking the One Ring, right? She's going to take that and become game master, only to find out that it's a sham, you know, which means all the power that Saul thought he had was a sham, because again, he has this realization that he was just a player all along. He thought he was the puppet master, pulling all the strings, even though he was captured by the party, even though he was killed and became one of the fallen, he still felt like he was the one in charge.
Right,
so
but
he has this crashing.
It makes sense of how he had. I mean, I hate to put it. I can't think of another way. He had such a lame death. Like when he died, I was like, you know, you see him at the end of the first issue or whatever, and it looks like, holy. I mean, he's like completely maxed out his skill tree.
Yeah,
you know, his character is been down here for 20 years. Like he has 100 level everything. And he just seemed like, oh, he's super powerful. He controls the machinations of the game and the world, and he has all the powers. And then Ash is like, I think I'm going to kill him, and kills him. Yeah. And I couldn't believe that it was like over like that.
Yeah. But now it makes sense, because he was just another person. He was just like any one of them. He was just a player in the game. He dies and becomes a fallen just like that. And so that's a crushing realization for him, kind of this idea that he spent 25 years down here by himself, thinking he was the guy in charge, thinking all of this was his doing. And to have that shattered for him is a character moment. Again, it's a character moment for who was, you know, effectively a zombie at this point. You know, that's what the fallen are, you know, this kind of soulless, mindless character that's really only in check because of the party he's with. So yeah, you know, everyone, you know, there's the part with Matt. You know, Matt now has the grief sword and the anger sword, the rage sword, whatever it is, you know. So now he's wielding two swords he can channel. You know, you have Angela there, who's trying to protect her daughter, again trying to figure out like what's her daughter doing down here as one of the fallen and all that. So you have all these characters pushed to the brink, and now they have to work together because they understand what the stakes are of these dice are being made, and if that goes back, then all this happens and we're stuck. We can never get out of it. So everyone pushed to the brink.
I mean, if the ultimate worst case scenario happens, the worlds merge, right?
Exactly.
Like die, and so it's
and I think that's what they're saying is that all the things that have to. This is we're getting to this timey-wimey stuff here. All the things.
Why does this keep happening to us?
I don't know. Maybe we're stuck in a time loop.
We're gonna have to think about it real long and hard if we ever decide to do Time Before Time. If you know, when that book finishes.
Yeah.
I think
what they're saying is all the things that happened in the past to get the to get the group back to die, they have all happened. The only thing that hasn't happened yet is the dice being finished and sent back, So Saul has already made the wooden dolls and sent them back to the Brontes so the Brontes' father can buy them and do that, The Kriegspiel has already been invented, and H.G. Wells has already written his book, and that has already led to actual war games, which led to tabletop games, which led to the creation of Die. So all these elements have already happened. The things that need to happen in Die that reflect back into the real world on Earth, they've all happened except for the dice going back. So they can stop. They feel like they can stop that one thing, because if that happens, then the loop is complete, and that causes the worlds to merge. So they got to stop that one act, because that's the only act left. The only thing they have left to stop. They can't stop anything else, because in the timeline of Die, that hasn't happened yet. So yeah, they have to be united on this quest. But in a lot of ways, they're just, all of them are just like way more broken than they were when they got here. And they were pretty broken when they got here in issue 1. So, and again, it's important to remember that the way time passes, it passes in real time. So they've been here for months and months and months.
Well, now, didn't that get called into question a little bit here? That the time seems like it's starting to move at a different pace now, and how it's connected to the real world.
Well, yes and no, because I think it's Angela makes mention of that's Molly, that's my daughter, but she's a little bit older than when I left her. And the idea then is that she is older because Molly is a fallen in Die, because the world has already ended in the future, a few years in the future, like after the merge. So that's why she's a little bit older. So again, the idea of how time flows, it moves a little differently. Yeah.
Okay. So if she weren't a fallen, we would she's fallen. She's older because she's in her final Earth form.
Yes.
As a fallen. Okay. I got you.
That's what she was.
It showed these paths which were set to converge are now diverging, and their times are being skewed. Okay. That's good. That's good.
When the world ended and all those people from Earth were brought into Die as fallen, that was a few years in the future. So from this point, as far as they're concerned, that's in 2020, because they entered the world in 2018. So in 2020, that's when the worlds merged and ended. And so the fallen are already there. But again, they're trying to prevent that from happening. But again, in a lot of ways, it already has happened. And this is, again, where the timey-wimey stuff gets weird. But yeah, I do think it's worth mentioning, as happens and will always happen if we do any sort of modern-ish book from the last few years, is the time frame in which this book was written. So
yeah,
volume
you
2,
can't avoid that.
Well, yeah, volume 2, issue 10, that was published in December 2019, which means it was written in fall 2019. Issue 11, the first issue of this arc, was published June 2020, which means it's written in early 2020. And even in the letter for issue 11, which is very, very short, because Kieran Gillen makes it very clear that I can't sum up what's going on in the world right now in a few paragraphs, and I can't write a 3-page essay right now because things are too hard. So the idea that this is now playing into what's happening in the real world is affecting the creation of the story now, and you can't help but think how those things would have played in. The idea that this is set in real time, and so making it this quote unquote cataclysm happened in 2020, your mind can't help but think whether there's a direct connection there or not. I don't think it's meant to be a direct connection. There is kind of an oblique meta connection that's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, when I looked at the publication date, I didn't remember that comics were back in print in June 2020, because I think that was
right
April
when
and
it started.
May. Yeah, it was April, May, and I remember the email from our comic shop owner who said, comics didn't stop printing through the Great Depression, World War II, this whole list of things where comic printing persevered and COVID-19 shut it down. Yeah. And it was basically not to sound negative, but it was a desperate plea to come buy back issues, come buy trades. We'll ship them to you. We'll deliver them to your house. We don't care.
Well, I did.
I dropped. I dropped $200 because I was like, their whole business model is like, I know that they're smarter than this, but their whole business model is kind of intrinsically hand to mouth because you're selling stuff that's a new release every week.
Well, exactly. They're reliant on new products showing up every single week. Like that's the business model there, Yes, there are other things. You can always buy other things. The store diversifies, but the whole idea is that new product ships every single week. And yeah, June is really early because the world shuts down in at least in the US in early March. And comics don't
parts
ship
of the US in early March.
Well, yeah,
it was a huge staggered effect. You and I are in Ohio. I think our governor was the first one to do a lockdown.
It was pretty close to it. Pretty close.
And I think some of them were as much as 2 weeks behind.
By
at the federal level.
No, I think it was authority. April and May for the most part. They were. I want to say books started shipping again at the end of May or middle of May, something like that. So I think it was like a month and a half, 2 months where they didn't go. It was something like that. But no, this was an early book. Yeah, in June, middle of the year when things were quasi-ish back on track. And yeah, there's no way. And especially when you look at, again, when the book would have been written, it would have been written as this was all happening. And of course, Kieran Gillen is over in the UK. So, his experience with this is a lot different. Stephanie Hans is in France. So, being over in Western Europe is also a different situation in terms of what they were dealing with. But yeah, you can't help, you can't divorce those things. I can't, at least as a reader, especially anytime you see any reference to and that terrible thing that happened in 2020, doesn't matter what it is, here it's the world of Die merging with Earth and cutting its cataclysm. But anytime you hear about something bad happening in 2020, again, for me, I don't think there'll ever be a time when I can separate those things. And on top of that too, I think part of the idea was that it was 20-sided. Like this was
that was the whole world orchestrated itself for this book.
Exactly. It wasn't meant to be this allegory or even taken as an allegory. It was just meant to be symbolic. I'm sure they thought it was clever. Like we do this here and it's 2020, like 2 20-sided die. Like there was all
and this idea of
set up for them
borrowing things from other tables and timelines. Like I'm just thinking back to the very mild hysteria of people thinking the world was going to end in 2012 because of like the Mayan calendar.
The Mayan calendar, yeah.
And I was like, how many days of your life have been dictated up until now by the Mayan calendar? You're just choosing it because you love cataclysmic events or the idea of them. Or I have no idea what goes into the psychosis of living into the Mayan calendar for one event only. But for some reason,
the doomsday prophecies in general. I mean, that's
100%.
The whole
100%. Like, I mean, there's
action there.
Oh my gosh, which was also rich fodder for comics because, like, that was Thanos' origin story was like these Christian rapturists from the 80s. There was I've never even seen it. I've just heard about it on other podcasts, but apparently there was some top 88 reasons Jesus will return in 1988 or something that was like a bestseller Christian book. And it was like, how is that not the most transparent marketing? It's so lame that it's like it's scratching an itch I can't even comprehend. That people have. But somehow these things get audiences. So, but in this one, it's very tastefully done and almost. I mean, it's like tongue in cheek about it. It's like, well, I mean, we're gonna play into the events of 2020 because we're playing a 20-sided die game. And it happens to be happening right now. And we were going to have a cataclysmic world-ending threat anyway.
This was the story, and it just
and they never say COVID. Right? They don't have to.
Well, yeah, because it is the unintentional connection there. Because again, I 100% believe that if you ask them what the story was here, they're like, it's going to be 2020 because again, The idea is this is happening in real time, right? So they're going to spend a couple years down here, 2018 to 2020. You do the math on how many issues that is, with breaks, 20 issues, with some breaks there, you get about 2 years worth of publication time. You get to 2020. 20 is obviously the number they're going for. Everything is based around 20. And so I'm sure that was the whole goal. And then the real world intrudes on this. And now it gives their story this potential extra meaning that they never planned for and probably didn't even, obviously didn't want, but it also becomes unavoidable. So I think for them, it was like, it's almost like you turn into the skid. You don't change it. You keep your story the way it is. And then you deal with it, as you might need to, but you don't change your story, either for the good or for the ill to reflect the times we're in. You tell the story you're going to tell, knowing that, that it was strong enough to begin with. It didn't need to have a real world, like connection or something like that, tether.
Right. It's just gravy when it happens. I mean, to use it sparingly like that and, allow the real world to intersect with your story without then going over and making a meal of it. Yeah. Just shows you, like, to me, it's the optimal balance of, like, I have a plan, I know where I'm going, but it's not so rigid that I will ignore literal interruptions in the print schedule of the book and cataclysmic world events. So it's like you have, the scaffolding is all built for the series, and he's able to improvise a little as he climbs up, and it doesn't interfere with what the building was that he envisioned.
I think it shows trust and belief in the story that they set out to tell, that this is strong enough as is to withstand this. We don't need to alter anything because of how it might be perceived or anything like that. I think that they believe, so the scaffolding, I think that's a great picture for me. The bones are good, the stuff underneath is good. And we can make some cosmetic things here if we think something might not be tasteful in the current times, whatever, but the bones, the inner structure is there. We can still tell the story about a cataclysm in 2020, about these worlds coming together, and it's not going to feel inappropriate. It's not going to feel too soonish or anything like that. I
didn't even think of it from that angle of people thinking it's too soon, because I think people wanted to talk about it, and there were plenty of people. A lot of people I know who were like, I don't want to read it. I don't want to see it in fiction. I don't want to watch a movie where people are doing, like they said, we don't want to. I think it hurt. Even though it ended up doing fine, I know people that weren't interested in, like, watching Sweet Tooth. Because it was like, it was about a global pandemic, and it was like that was in production before COVID.
Yeah, and the book was written before.
And the book was in 2012. Yeah.
But you can understand, though, right? You can understand at some point.
Yeah, I mean, so
I can understand, even if I think it's an overreaction, but I'm not going to judge anybody for how they feel about it. I get that, even if I think, okay, I think it's a little overboard, but if that's your stance, hold to it. I more power to you.
Whereas I felt. But again, you have to watch it to know this, but that was such a hopeful, upbeat, optimistic, like, plucky show.
Yes.
Even though the setting was so bleak. Whereas like when we were in the cold, dark months of winter and it was quarantine and I watched HBO's adaptation of Station 11, I was like, oh God, this is bleak. Because it's a bleak show. It's a bleak book. It's a bleak show. It's about an airborne flu virus that wipes out most of the world in a gut-wrenching way, and it's not like very hopeful or beautiful or anything like that. And it was like, why did you feel the need to release this now? Like, come on, you could have at least done it in the summer months where I can, like, go outside and breathe non-pandemic air or something. But we're all stuck in
your head for a little bit.
We're all stuck inside, lonely and depressed. And they released this bleak piece. So I know people who wrote, like, negative reviews of that show, and they're like, this is not the show we needed right now. I'm like, again, I'm pretty sure they had that in production
Yeah.
before COVID, they just didn't veer from it or stagger it or,
No.
hold off on it at all.
But I think it also comes down to them being like, listen, they feel they made a good show, which they did. And just, if you don't want to watch it, you don't have to watch it. Like, no one's making you tune in. So,
The way people talk, you think someone is holding a gun to their head, making them watch shows.
I know. But this being so early, again, coming out in June, meaning that this arc was being worked on in the early parts of 2020. So the scripts that are being written, the pages that are coming back, all this is happening in the early parts of lockdown before they get shipped out to the printers and all that. So, again, it's hard to separate. And yeah, I understand people, they don't want to have that connection there. And I don't think Gillen and Hans want that or are trying to invoke that. I don't think they're trying to play on that in terms of this case, this specific area of being like describing this cataclysm in 2020. I don't think they're trying to play into that. I don't think they're reaching for any sort of metatextual
no, it was just there for you to draw the obvious connection.
Yeah.
Has no import on the story, because if they had happened to have set this timeline in such a way that all of these events were happening in 2010 in the story, they probably would have. But I kind of wonder if they knew that, like, okay, in terms of publishing, I've wanted to tell an RPG story for a long time, and we're coming up on the year 2020, which is the ultimate RPG. I'm like, that. I can't imagine a world in which that wasn't a factor from the outset.
And that goes back to what I was saying before. You have to feel like that master plan was, again, they know how many. If we're talking about this RPG game, we're going to do it 20 issues because it's a 20-sided die. When would we have to start the series for it to end? How do we time this? Because again, in their world, time passes. The time in die is the same as it passes in the real world. So if we're there for however long the series runs, how many years, and they come back, we want them to come back in 2020. Like, what's the math have to do to line that up? It's not exactly perfect that volume 4 ends in 2021, but in the world of the comic ends in 2020. And I think you're absolutely right that it feels like they did some backward math. Let's figure out where this needs to go. So when we pitch this thing and we do it, everything lines up, everything makes sense for the time, because we want to have that 2020 bit there. That's going to be a cool bit for our story. And then the real world crashes in on that and it takes on different meaning. But yeah, I choose to believe that all that was intentional. Like when the book came out, when it was started, all that played a factor, I think, to the point where if this book came out like now, I could see it taking place a few years earlier.
Right.
So it would take place in 2020, that sort of thing, So
and you probably wouldn't get full marks for it because it would seem like pandering if you did that
going
now.
Backwards. Yes. As opposed to setting it up beforehand and having an end quasi on time. No, I agree with that completely. But I think the point I'm trying to make is the year 2020 was significant enough that they would have, whenever the story they told, it would be planned around that, that would have been
right.
an important factor because they wanted that connection. They wanted to have all those 20s line up like that.
Yeah. And if it, ends on the 20th day of a month at, let's see, let me do it at 8 p.m., which would be the 20th hour of the day. It wouldn't shock me if they threw a few little more details like that or something in toward the end. Maybe that was the time they gathered for their party, in the first issue.
I have to double check that. But
if it's at 8 p.m. or something, I would be.
They're not Two-Face here. They're not that concerned about 2s and 20s. I mean, they're a little more flexible than that. But yeah, I mean, just looking ahead a little bit. Yeah. So issue 15, the last issue of this arc came out in November 2020, and then the final arc started up in May of 2021. So taking 5-6 months off, come back and finish the end there. So it does end in September of 2021, which obviously we're still in it at that point there. But yeah, this is a kind of book, we talked about the idea of role-playing games, and the whole kind of point is to escape into something that maybe is more yourself, escaping your world to exist, not just play in a world, but try to exist in the world.
Escaping the confines of your world.
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing here, obviously, is that when our characters are back down there now, again, they're no longer role-playing these characters. They're bringing their full adult selves into these characters, and they're living their lives there. So going into Die is not an escape anymore. It is not an escape from the real world. It is their life, and they don't view it as an escape. So to have something like the real world, having the COVID-19 pandemic intrude in on it, even in a tangential way, again, it actually does feel in line with what they're trying to tell here. This idea that even in a thing you think might be an escape, in this case is not. Die is just as real. It's kind of the thing that Izzy was saying the whole time, right? Everything we do here matters. So
right.
if we wouldn't have done it, quote unquote, in the real world, we don't do it down here. Well, now that all of our characters have a full understanding of what the world is, I think they all now understand, okay, yes, real world, Die world, doesn't matter. This is our reality. This is our world. There is no escape. We're not role playing. This is our lives right now. And yeah, they've all come around. Essentially, Chuck is still the wild card, but the idea that everything we do matters, because if it didn't matter, then Angela would have offed the fallen that looks like her dollar Molly, because it isn't actually Molly, again, is it really uncertain there? Who knows? But if their actions didn't matter, then it wouldn't have mattered if she had taken her out, because it just would have been another fallen that was gone, but that's her daughter she sees,
right.
And the understanding is that is a future version of her daughter. So,
but as we discussed last time, the choices you make when you think the choices don't matter,
yes,
are the most interesting ones.
Yes, yeah.
And you think, okay, well, that's not really my daughter, but I'm not a killer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bring her with me. And it's like, wow, that's a really interesting choice. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and understand that happens before we get the download of what's actually happening in Die. So yeah. I think it is important that Angela makes that choice before they actually know what the fallen are, before they get that download. She makes a choice not to kill her because she's not going to do that. That I think that's an important point for her character, to make that choice. And then we get, that happens in issue 12, or the end of 11, beginning of 12. And then, the big downloads in 13, that's where we get the full understanding of who the fallen are and what's going on. And said, I think that the order of things there, definitely matters.
Yeah. So what else do you have on this book? I've pretty much exhausted, I was going to say my thoughts, my notes anyway. I have an endless amount of thoughts.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, again, I think from a character standpoint, it comes down to kind of where everyone is at. I think Matt, to me right now, is really interesting. The fact that he is wielding these two swords that are powered by these incredibly powerful emotions. Idea that,
and I think that's really interesting that you say that, yes, because from the outset, Matt was the one that I felt like I identified with the most.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was kind of hacked off in volume 2. That was my ensemble whining earlier.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I was like, this Grief Knight is a really interesting concept. And I thought Matt was a really interesting character. And I just haven't, I'm like, I feel like I'm barely getting glimpses of him. And so, yeah, it was very fun to see him.
I do think I think that's fair, though. If you were to tally up, not just like action scenes or scenes they're present in, but like character growth scenes, Matt hasn't had much. Matt is simply just like, okay, make me sad so I can go kill this giant dragon, or make me sad so I can wipe out these 50 fallen that have, besieged us, but here now, the idea that, he gets word, Izzy sends word through one of the gods, their Mistress Woe, that back on Earth, Matt's father died. And again, we know his story of his mother died when he was young. His daughter was very sick when she was born. So death and loss is such a big motivator for him. which is kind of plays into his character, this grief knight. But yet when he gets this news, he is not sad. He channels that into another emotion. He is now rageful. He is angry at Ash. And so, yeah, he goes to like wherever like the head of the knights are and picks up a second sword. And now there's this dual act. I mean, when he was super depressed and sad, he was basically unstoppable, So
Right.
now he has two emotions, rage and sadness. I mean, like, that's like way OP at this point. But I think
right. And basically,
but it makes
by
him
the time he doesn't have one or both of those, they'll be out of the situation one way or the other.
Yes.
Like they'll either have all died or they'll have accomplished what they want to.
Yes.
Those are the only things that will make his rage and sadness go away.
Exactly. So it is the idea that he will subject himself to what he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to feel sad. He doesn't want to feel angry, but he understands that if he channels that here, that could that can help them get back, or it can help them end all of this, whether that's their ending or ending of the story, if he channels that in some way or the other. But the idea that he becomes much more powerful, and I do think he's given the character growth here that other characters got early on. He was kind of the one I think we saw a little bit less of. We saw more of Angela, Chuck, and Izzy in volume 2. We saw a little more of what their powers correlate to, what it takes from them, and how it affects them. We get a little more with Angela here when it comes to Molly, but Matt was still a little one-note-ish in terms of his character and what he'd been given room to do. So I think you're right to kind of put a mark on that prior to this point. But here he's given a little more by giving that extra.
And the indication is we're gonna see him reach his potential. Of his story arc. He's gonna deal with like the grief of losing his mom as a teenager, his life as a statistics professor, all this other stuff.
The anger he has of being trapped back down here again, like channel all that in.
That's all going to be funneled into the final arc. Yeah. And one way or another, he's going to get resolution.
Yeah.
And I can't help but suspect a happy ending for this book. It may not be like rainbows and sunshine, but I think it will be like the characters are better off than when we found them.
Be hard to be a lot worse though. Let's be honest, because they're
all.
That's
kind of what I'm saying. But
they're all pretty down. They're all pretty down.
Read the book, and I think if you didn't have words and you just flipped through this, or if this was in another language, the tone of it is so dark and gritty. Yeah. And I don't think you would automatically think like, well, it's going to be a happy ending. Yeah. It's obviously a fairy tale ending. It's like, no. This looks pretty bleak. And they're in a really bleak situation, and their lives were bleak. Like, even if they get back to what they had, which in issue 1 or 2, that was their whole goal, was like, no, but like, I got a court date. Like let's just get out of here.
Yeah. Like I have to get back because I'll lose custody of my kids,
Right. And it's like, I don't know if anyone told you this, but your life sucked.
Well, and that's part of what Chuck's thing was. Obviously, when he said it at the time, we didn't know that he was dying, but part of it is like, because again, on the surface, Chuck had the best life, quote unquote. He was wildly successful. Obviously, he's incredibly terrible person, but he was wildly successful in a way that no one else was. Now, none of them would be considered happy, but he at least was unhappy with a ton of money, but he's the one who doesn't want to go back, because he also looks at like, listen, man, it wasn't that great back there, so why should we go back?
Right
Here, like, I'm a damn knight. I'm a warrior. I can do whatever I want and I'll be fine. So that's, at the end of volume 1, before they split the party, that's his whole mindset of like, why should we go back? Think about how much better things are here, or maybe not better here. Just think about how much worse they were back there. Think about all the problems you had up there. Maybe we should stay here. And that was kind of his whole pitch at the time. Like, hey man, like, what exactly are you going back to up there? You're going back to an unhappy marriage. You're going back to the hospital bills or whatnot. You're going back to a custody battle and things like that. So, but I think there's something to be said for them saying, doesn't really matter. We have to go back because that's where we're from. That's home. Those are our people. Those are our kids, our spouses, whatever it is. We have to get back to that. And no, yeah, I think it's not a depressing book, but there are parts that they're pretty downer. They're pretty downer. That's kind of the base ethos of the book.
Yeah, which I was connecting to the whole Gen X thing. We record this far enough out that I haven't heard any feedback on that from Gen X listeners. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're too repressed to comment. I don't know.
But it is clearly intentional that, again, these characters, I believe, are effectively the same age that Kieran Gillen is, and that's the reason why it's set at the same current time as his childhood was. That all that stuff's intentional. That the timing in which these kids grew up and the world that shaped them as kids is vastly important. Again, for a number of reasons, as we've talked about, especially last week, about just the idea of what society was like, and what the options, again, for someone like Dominic would have been. It's important of when this was set, and I think that Gen X thing is super important as well. Again, I don't think that's accidental. He's drawing from personal experience, I have to assume, of being a kid at that time, being of that age in that time period, and growing up in that world and how it affects you. Again, it's totally different if it's 10 years after that or 20 years after that. It's a whole different world if that you're dealing with. So that factor, I think, is crucial. I think it was a great catch by you, or a great note by you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think I wouldn't have noticed it if he was a character that I wasn't more interested in. But the fact that it makes me look more savvy just because I was personally drawn to the way that character was depicted. And then I saw him take the back seat, and I was like, oh, man, he got like back middle. It's like, he was riding the little hump in the back of the station wagon.
In a lot of ways, though, it works on him, though, because his character basically is the one that gets crapped on, because that's where his power comes from. That being dismissed, and I think there's an added factor there that they talk about in that first issue about him like being the only black kid in like the metal scene there where they grew up. So the fact that he, no matter what, would have always felt like an outsider, would have felt, even in a group that he would have been included with, would have always been an outsider because of his race. And he said, it's not something that they harp on here, but it was worth mentioning early on that as kids back then, that would have had an effect on him. These things that would have, that you experience as a kid growing up would have then had an effect as an adult. And again, the idea that Matt would still just kind of get crapped on, because again, the whole point is we got to make this guy sad, because the sadder he is, the more unstoppable he is. So yeah, he gets a bit of a backseat in that in the first couple arcs there. But here with this added bit of, oh yeah, by the way, while you're stuck down here again, your dad died. So now he said the fact that when he gets this news, he is not sad. His first reaction is anger. It's anger at Ash for he looks at her as the reason they're trapped back down here again, and while they're still trapped down here. So the fact that his first reaction is to go to rage and anger, and so he can channel and grab that sword there, I think again shows a different side to his character, that it isn't just sorrow. It is this just strong emotion in him that you have to, I think when you look back in the early issues there's maybe some repression there, this rage. Oh, yeah.
Well, that in the Star Wars universe, he's like a Sith master, right? I mean, because these are like all the things Jedis can't tap into.
Well, yeah, but he is more like Anakin before he turns, because he is trying to suppress these things. It's like he knows
he doesn't think they're productive.
Yes,
to do.
Yeah.
And so he's entered a world where they are extremely productive.
Yeah. And he doesn't want to tap into that. He knows he's a rageful person in real life. So he tries to suppress that. He knows he deals with some level of depression or how grief strikes him and what it turns him into. He knows what that is in his life for living his 40 some odd years. And yet he sees them both as negative things, that these are, I can't give into these things because these are revealing the worst parts of me, the worst qualities in me. So I have to repress them in my daily life, dealing with my kids, as a teacher, as a husband, as a son, all this. I have to repress these things because I don't like what they bring out of me. And yet he's down in this place now and he has no choice, really. You know, his grief is what powers him. And then when he's given this other news, he has no choice but to release this anger and rage. These things he's trying to suppress are the things that give him like insane amounts of power. And so the idea that he would then have to deal with that, going back, knowing that in order to get out of here, he has to tap into these things. So what does that mean for him back in the real world?
Yeah.
Is he not living his full life by suppressing these things and instead of trying to find a way to maybe be constructive with them, you know, how to channel them in a healthy way instead of just suppressing them, you know? Because it seems that what he's done, all he's done is ignore it, act like it's not there, which I guess if we have any British listeners, that does seem a very British thing. Just act like it's not there.
Carry on.
Yeah. But, you know, here it gives him power, but in his current mindset, he hates that. He doesn't like that it gives him power, you know, because he feels that this is the negative side to him that he doesn't want to bring out. And yeah, it sets him up for a very interesting finale, an interesting arc in terms of how he deals with these two just incredibly powerful emotions.
Yeah. Great character, and actually perhaps intentionally left in the chamber a little later.
I think so. Yeah. Well, I think because they needed him to come out. They needed to come out here. Yeah, it had to be here when you know he gets the word that his father has died. You know, so it's like you keep him at a simmer. Everyone else gets a little more. You know, you get the backstory of Izzy, you get Chuck, you get Angela, everyone gets a little more, and Matt's just kind of sitting at that simmer, so he can explode here at the end and kind of help propel us towards the final arc. I think you're right. I think you're right that that was intentional. That he wasn't totally backburnered, but he just wasn't given the character growth.
I think the language I used was it's like being in the back middle seat.
Yeah.
He was kind of stuck. You also, I guess you weren't as young of a child, but it's probably an 80s thing too. I was just thinking in the early 90s, my friends had some station wagon where when, you know, front seat and, you know, the back row was full, there were technically seat belts in like the flat trunk area.
In the back, yep.
You remember what car that was?
Well, yeah, I mean,
the ultimate garbage seat. You're facing the people in traffic behind you.
Oh no, I had a Buick station wagon growing up. We had the stereotypical like wood panel station wagon. Oh, we had that hardcore. So
that's Matt's seat in this tour, but which is like now I don't know when you hit like your growth spurt, but you were probably too tall to be shoved back there.
No.
Unless everyone in your family's tall.
They are, but I quickly was taller than all of them. So no, I very quickly got shotgun in most places because it's like, no, I can't sit back there. I'm not going to fit. So you're short. Go back there. Like, I'm short. I'm 6 foot. Whatever. I'm 6'5". Get back there. So
yep. I don't think a 6'5" adult could fit in the back of that. I think, you know, as second graders, it was like a tight squeeze.
Yeah. But
anyway,
Matt,
great character.
Matt has been primed. In the way that he got primed a little later, because everyone is primed for the end here. He got primed a little bit later, but because of his ability, he is the most explosive. You know, he can wreak the most havoc, and I think that's why they kind of left him to the end of this arc to help propel them towards the finale. I think that's strategic planning, kind of character planning there for deployment in their story.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, again, that's all my thoughts. You got any other straggling notes there?
I don't think I do. I think that's
then Matt will bottle it all up and save it for volume 4.
That sounds good.
And we'll be the I can't think of a good analog for us. That we're not the Grieve or Rage Knights. We're like the pedantic note taking knights.
Yeah.
The book club nights. I don't know.
Kind of the anal retentive nights. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, something like that.
If we do podcast merch, The anal retentive knights.
Yeah, you know what?
Be our best selling T-shirt.
You know what? Cut that. Don't leave it in there.
All right. Well, thank you again for listening. Pick up Volume 4, start reading immediately, and come back next Thursday for Volume 4 as we wrap up the series of Die. Follow us on Twitter, Storied Arcs, storiedarcs.com, Instagram.com/Storied Arcs, and like and share. Feel free to rate and review us on whatever podcast network you listen on. I think we have it's always shifting. It's like now Pocket Cast is the number one, and that's what I use, which doesn't allow ratings. So if you're using
Spotify
that,
or Apple or thing like that, give us a rating.
Spotify, Apple, it's just a huge way to help us out. We don't sell any merch. We don't sell any ad time. That's basically all we have. So between that and a retweet, that is all we ask of you. And just keep coming back and join us for discussion. And we'll see you next time.
Peace.